Class is in session.
Hey, you doing? And welcome to Unlearn 16. Class is in session. You just get me today, guys. You just get me. But you're gonna get an introspective me for a second. Because I've been talking a lot about Metro Prep Academy in Toronto and saving the school and how Ryan and I are going to change it and all of the goals and all of the things. I'm doing all these renovations you guys can go check out. But I think I need to spend a bit of time, and this is the hard part, thinking about and deciphering what we didn't do well, what I didn't do well in the past, what teachers as a whole don't do well, what education doesn't do well, what I can fix if I can fix it. But first, there's no way for me to sit here and say everything we've ever done or everything I've ever done and the school's ever done has been perfect. Of course not. So I'm going to go back and I want to sort of highlight some of the things that I don't want to replicate and sort of take acknowledgement of the problems that they could have presented or created, and at some point sometimes the good things that came out of them, right? When I first started here, this school was very, very marks driven, to the point where we had this marks board that was up. Everybody's averages were up, and for the most part, I didn't even question it. I was, young, and I thought, okay, well, this is what private school did, and that eventually fell by the wayside. And it didn't just fall by the wayside for no reason. It's not that we got bored putting up marks. The reality was, I don't think for most students that your average is a driving factor in A, your confidence, or B, you actually doing better. So listen, we have to do marks. Anybody that's like, oh, we should do away with marks, it's ridiculous. We live in a system in which when you get into university, it is mark driven. You have marks, you have in the States SAT scores. We can't get around that until there's a complete overhaul. But there still needs to be a way to sort of try, and this is the key word, try to get at somebody's capacity, somebody's potential, somebody's work ethic, somebody's drive, somebody's passion. There needs to be a way to kind of gear that. Otherwise, there's no way to sort of allow and facilitate, students to go into different disciplines. And when I say it out loud, it still sounds silly. Like it sounds like this mark is the be all and end all. This grade is the be all and end all of who they're ever going to be, which is just not the case. But what we found out, and when I look back on it, is kids that are driven by marks have some stuff they need to deal with. And kids that the mark itself, the grade itself in that competition causes them to collapse, have different things to deal with. But they both have issues, and they both have sort of a different way of motivating themselves that we still need to tackle. And I feel as though we need to reconfigure, redress the way in which we focus on the grade. And I've said this before, a kid getting an A in a class isn't necessarily cause for a parade. The kid busting their butt and getting an A in the class, throw out the streamers, right? The kid that busts their butt and gets a C, streamers. Because I think what we need to start doing is understanding that work ethic, that perseverance, that continuously learning from your mistakes and getting a bit better and getting a bit better and getting a bit better. This is what has inherent beautiful value, right? Because making mistakes and stinking at something, but doing it anyway, guys, that's, if you can have a 16-year-old that knows how to do that or is capable of doing that, there's not going to be anything that's going to stand in their way, because they're constantly going to get better at whatever it is they're doing. The individual that it comes easy to and never has to be challenged and never has to throw down and never has to dig deep, I'm not saying that they're going to be, but those individuals will eventually come up against it. And when they come up against it, I'm not going to know as an employer, as a teacher, how their character is going to handle that setback, how their consciousness is going to handle defeat and failure. Are they going to crumble? I don't know. But I do know the kid that busts their butt, gets the C, takes the class again, gets a B, takes the class again, gets an A. That kid's proven something different. They really, really are. And I think there needs to be space for that, as well as grades. Listen, achieving a certain grade is important, and it does have value. I just don't think it has all the value. So I was very happy when we decided to, chuck that. We don't necessarily, put that as the driving force of the school. So that was one thing. I think me as a young teacher, I used to yell way too much. Yeah, a young teacher has two gears, I think. You want to be everybody's best friend, and the class goes out of freaking hand, and hopefully you can reel it back in, or you do, which nobody does, by the way, which everybody always tells you to do, which for the first 3 months you don't smile. Has anybody given that information or that advice when they started? For the first 3 months, don't smile. Why? So they know you're serious. Well, guys, I was the former, right? I had classes. I mean, they called us by our first name. They came and go as they saw fit. My classroom management never got tried because I also had, by the way, when I first started, I was teaching 19-year-olds, so full-fledged adults here, who really cared about their grade. It was a double cohort year. So I didn't need to put a lot of external pressure on them. They just put it on themselves and sat down and did what I asked. And we had conversations. We were so close in age. It was like just debate, discussion. But a few years in, I've had classes that have made me rethink the profession. I had a grade 7 class one time that it was right after lunch, and every day I'd come into that class and I adored them individually, but together they were napalm. They were catastrophic. And every day they'd be like, Joe, we're going to be good today. We're going to be good. Because they really wanted to be good. I know they weren't bad kids. They really wanted to be good. And about halfway through, I'd have indigestion and I'd be ready to call it a day from my teaching profession. And every day, those same kids would walk out and say, don't worry, Joanna, tomorrow's going to be better. And I often think back on that class, because that was maybe about 5 or 6 years into teaching. And how would I have handled it differently? Because there are some classes, and this is essential teaching. Forget the material, forget all of that. If you can't manage a classroom, you can't get the information across. So I often think back about that class and like, how would I have handled it differently? Would I have separated students? Would I have singled them out? Would I have taken, but there were, in this particular class, it was like these kids were acting up and I calmed these kids down and then these kids would act up and then these kids would act up. These kids would act up again and then it would be back. It was like they tag teamed me. And every once in a while, I do think you get a class that is, so difficult in their composition, in the parts that make up the whole, that I honestly believe you need to change the composition. And by the way, class composition can be changed with one student. You can take one out, you can add a new one in, changes overnight, which I find fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. It's not just about the kids in the room, it's the dynamic of the personalities in the room. So how would I handle that differently now? Talk to the parents more. Have the parents in. Have the parents in with the student. I think if you have the time, and I realize I'm talking from a private school, but if you have the time and the capacity to have the student sitting in front of you, the parent sitting in front of you, and meeting the thing head on, you also end up forging an understanding and a bond with that family and that student, which sometimes makes those individuals want to try harder, maybe not be the kid that's piping up when they have the chance, right? You forge that. The more that you can forge a connection, and again, student and family, because the quickest way you're ever going to learn about a kid, spend 10 minutes with their parents. and their siblings or their grandparents or whoever's in their lives, for good or for bad, guys. It's a brilliant insight into who they are. And if you have a better insight into who they are, you have a better insight into what dynamic you can possibly create in the classroom in order to minimize distraction and maximize learning. What I've realized is I shouldn't have taken politics in university. I should have taken psychology. I think child psychology, when I think back, child psychology and adolescent psychology, which are two different things, that should be teachers college. Whatever else is going on in teachers college, throw it out. Child psychology, adolescent psychology, understanding driving forces of behaviors, of different learning abilities and difficulties, of how to combat those, of how they connect to a student identity, about how family and issues within the family can manifest within the student in your classroom and what you can do about that and how you can contend. Are you kidding me? I can't get to the War of 1812 until I get all of that. And the only reason I've gotten half decent at it, and I do say half, is because I've been doing it for so long. But that should really be the driving force. So when I talk now, and a lot of people are like, oh, it's just, you have such a great perception. It's not because I came with it. It's not because I was born this amazing critical thinker. It's because I've lived 23 years of figuring it out, of failing. And when I say failing, there are kids that I couldn't get to, right? There are kids that have flipped their desk in my classroom. There are kids that have wished horrible things onto my house. There are kids who have been, go to different schools or have gone through it, never to set foot back in my classroom again. And I look at that and I'm like, those are my failures. So what did I do to cause, maybe not to cause, it's not like I'm taking all the weight on my shoulders. Number one, you're the adult. Number two, you're the teacher. Number three, you need to be, as a teacher, you need to be the person that is constantly looking for roads of mediation and mitigation as opposed to solving a problem once it's happened. And that's what I got good at later in my teaching career, is seeing the train going off the rails really early on and being able to mitigate the off-road. I had a student who would get frustrated, right? He'd get really frustrated. And if I let it bubble over, we'd end up having to call his parents and it would be a thing. In his last couple of years at Metro, though, I could see it coming. I could be like, psst, catch his eye, shake my head, sometimes take him for a walk outside and say, you're not feeling good here, right? He'd be like, no. Or he'd say whatever he said. I said, okay, let's just take a breather. Let's take a breather and take it down a notch. Because 9 times out of 10, those explosions, those either verbal or you could see them like manifesting physically, they all come from anxiety, insecurity, and frustration with not being able to do what's been placed in front of them. And kids, as well as adults, find it very, very, very hard to ask for help. All these parents are like, just ask for help. Why don't you ask for help? Just go to your teacher. It's really hard for them. It's hard for them because they don't want to do it in front of their peers. So you got to figure out a way to have conversations with students before that happens, right? Before they're gonna pop off or give up or get quiet and recede. You have to figure out strategies to do that beforehand. And again, all of that is helped with meetings with them and their families. And you need to figure out how to get ahead of the game. Because if you can get ahead of the game, I'm not saying every student walks out here with an A, but every student can walk out thinking, oh, but I accomplished something I didn't accomplish yesterday. So if I can get ahead of it and I can say, well, that's not going right, right? And that worked really, really well. Here's my problem. Here's my current problem. I don't know if any teachers agree with this. My current problem, the kids that pop off, the kids that get angry, the kids that are outwardly disruptive, you can see those kids coming a mile away. And those kids tend to take energy and your attention, as they should. All students deserve that. What about the kids that get quieter? What about the kids that recede more, that close off more? What about the kids that, just quiet. It's like quiet quitting. It's like you have people in the workforce right now who are quietly quitting, who are just doing what they need to do because they don't feel engaged, because they don't feel supported, because they don't feel acknowledged or respected. So they just do the bare minimum until they can get the heck out. Well, that's a failure of mine then. But those kids are hard, very, very hard to see, right? How do you differentiate between a kid who doesn't want to try and a kid who doesn't understand enough to try? Especially when they're probably not going to be willing to say anything. They're not going to be forthcoming, especially in front of their peers. Younger kids, better. You get to the teenage years, and those kids, all they care about, and I don't mean this in a negative way, this is in a child and adolescent development way, their peers matter more. By far. Way more than the teacher, way more than their parents, their peers matter the most. They're supposed to. Their peers are supposed to matter because they're supposed to differentiate from their parents. They're supposed to be individuate. They're supposed to become adults. And this is the painful transitional time, right? It's all supposed to happen. That's why your friends, of course, your friends matter. But what matters more is how can you still maintain an outlet or a safe space to verbalize when you're scared, when you feel inadequate, when you feel incapable of achieving, when you feel flat out stupid. Who do I go to? Who can I go to? And that's the magic of a solid school. That's it. It's not about AP course. It's not about a good basketball program. It's not about the right uniform, although hoodies do matter. It's about, and I don't even know how you quantify this. It's about, have you created a school in which the lion's share, and I use that term because our mascot's a lion, the lion's share of students feel safe enough to do that and utilize that, and they've gotten better because of it. That's something that is priceless. That is a way that you really do grade, or you should grade and quantify and judge a private school. I've often said, because we have a lot of people that will come in here and say, how many kids go off to university? Well, 99%. Why is that your question? It's a wrong question. You're asking the wrong question. You should be asking, of your students that go to university and college, how many of them are successful there? How many of them are successful there and then go on to utilize that and become successful adults? Because this is where the seeds have been planted. That's a great question. That's a really good question. Give me the statistics on that. Because I think for a very long time, Metro Prep and most schools, right? Most high schools for sure, consistently just measure, do we get them into university? It's a wrong question. So I'm going to try to change that. I am going to try to figure out a way to track and to understand how our students do, to have more. That's why alumni support and connections really matter. It's about, you went from here. Did we give you enough? Where did we drop the ball? And that's where those reflections are quite important, right? If you can have those really good kind of connections and figure out if a student will sit in front of you and be honest, right? And I think I'm going to bring that back. I think I'm going to, as vice principal, I'm going to bring that back. I'm going to have students sit and talk about what they need more of, what fails them. Now, a lot of students are going to say, I don't want to write tests. Okay. Listen, nobody wants to write a test. But there's a skill set and a lesson that needs to be learned there if you want to go to college, university. There's something there. You need to learn how to engage in that confidently. You need to know how to prep for that. You need to learn how to handle the anxiety and the stress of that. Other kids will say, well, I don't want to write an essay. Again, there are skill sets that are difficult in high school, but necessary. And that's why it's probably better to ask students once they've been to university or college. Like, I understand not every kid goes to university and college. I get that. Metro Prep Academy is a university prep school. If you're coming here, it's because that is your goal. Okay. So let's just deal with that on the front end. Because the kids that have gone off to university, those are the kids and been successful or not. Those are the kids that can say, you need to do more of that. Or this is what they're doing at university now. You need to adjust. You need to change this, right? For a very long time, I remember not liking extra time on tests because I'm like, but there's a need to have, there's this objective. When you're young, you're stupid. You think there are objective realities in the world, which they're just not. When I was young, I used to think that an hour test, the time itself and the timing has a value put upon a student. So when you see every student operating in that specific timing, you're getting an objective sort of answer about, do they know the information and can they do it under the stress, under the weight of a time? And then what I came to realize as an intelligent person who's actually taught for a very long period of time is a student that can memorize and recite in 60 minutes isn't necessarily the most intelligent kid in the room or the most capable student in the room. It's just the student who has learned or has the capacity to fit in that box and fit in the way in which we test. And we all know, sure, they can go off to university and still do that, but then what? When they get to third and fourth year university, they're doing their PhD or they're in business school. Now what? Now what? Because very rarely in real life is somebody sitting over you with a stopwatch asking you to do your job. Very, maybe as a teacher, I don't know. So what am I testing there? And there's no objectivity in using a sit down, write this test, fill in these questions, answer these multiple choice. There's no objectivity in that because I've already decided the lane in which I'm going to teach and test. By choosing that test format, I've already been biased. I've already implored a bias on how that kid should be tested. And the funny part is that strategy isn't the way it works in the real world. It really isn't. And when people talk about education not being blah, 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 listen, education is absolutely useful. I think, though, we should be learning a little bit more about, and we are, and we're starting to adapt. I think sometimes we go too much the other way, but we're starting to adapt to, does this have real world application and use? For example, public board doesn't take off late marks. What? It's ridiculous. The number one thing that we should be teaching kids in high school, the number one thing, how do you effectively time manage? You have to. You also have to understand when you're trying to teach those kids how to effectively time manage that they're not adults, they don't have control over their lives. So when they make time for something and then their parent says, we're going away, or we're having, your grandma's coming over, or you're babysitting tonight, or, and all these other things, it's not like an adult where for the most part you can control your time. Teenagers don't control their time. And in a lot of cases, their parents and grandparents and siblings infiltrate that time and disallow them to sort of put in place the time management that they had already planned to. So you got to take all those things into consideration, all of it, as a teacher of a high school student. That does not mean you eliminate them having to understand time management and them having, and this is where it comes back to what I was saying, you sit down with their parents at the very beginning of the school year. And if a kid can't go home because too much is going on, you talk to the parents, say, listen, I think it's best if they stay here for a half hour and really work and focus on doing this. And most parents think it's fantastic. Right? You also have to take into account that a lot of kids have responsibilities. jobs. They take care of their families. They take care of ailing siblings or parents or grandparents. They have other responsibilities in their world, and you have to take that into account. Their primary job, as a teacher sees it, should be learning, but that's not the way the world works, and that's not the way their life works. So you have to figure out, because those kind of students, by the way, kid that works 30 hours a week and still gets a B in grade 12 physics, oh, I'll hire them 7 days a week and twice on Sundays, because that kid's going places. Forget the grade. Look at how they manage, right? Look at how they multitask. Look at how they prioritize and do what needs to be done, and they don't give up, and they don't let go, and they don't throw their hands up in frustration and walk away from the whole thing. That is impressive. So as a new beginning to Metro Prep, I really want to figure out ways to maximize all those things, to step away from the old guard, to step away from the old, standbys of the way we've always done it, not to step away from accountability and responsibility, but to ensure that that accountability and responsibility is evenly distributed, is fairly given, and completely understood as expectations at the beginning of the semester. I'm not saying we're not going to make mistakes, guys. I'm not saying that everything's going to be perfect from here on in. What I'm saying is this: figuring out the brilliance and the potential of an individual, and not letting that unique qualification that makes them them. Don't smudge that out. Don't dampen that. Figure out how to expand it, how to embolden it, how to make them feel stronger in it, and then help them achieve everything they need to achieve in a world full of structure and expectation and rules that they might not like, but they're going to need to have a handle on how to dive into it and utilize them anyways. And on that note, I will see you guys next Tuesday. Same bat time, same bat channel. Dismissed.